Do you know how hard it is to get a small, compact, affordable switch that has both 10 GBE on copper and 10 GBE on fibre and is managed? Seriously, this thing rocking out at about 130 to 140 nicker might sound like a lot of money, but once you start doing the research into small, compact, affordable 10 gigabit Ethernet full 10 GBE managed switches, you suddenly notice something. You find out that the market is actually flooded with quite a lot of cheap switches. For example, you can get yourself combination 2.5 gig and 10 gig switches pretty cheap. They're all over the place for about $150. You can get yourself full 10 GBE SFP only network switches, both managed and unmanaged, for just a few hundred nicker. Once you try to get a switch that's got both copper and fibre 10G on a single switch that is managed for less than about 300 nicker, you really hit a wall. When I look around online, you could look at Unify's offering, which is a 4-port semi-managed switch with a PoE power input there, and that's about 299 nicker, and you still need the Unify controller. You can look at switches from TrendNet and TP-Link, and they knock around for about 250, 260. You can even go MicroTik and get hold of one for about 200 nicker, but again, that's 4 ports of copper and not a combination of the both. This arrives at 130, 140, and although, as I'll say later on, it is super duper budget, I'll say right now, the price tag is going to be the big appeal for this switch, but is it any good? But before we go any further into this switch, we've got to talk a little bit about today's sponsor, and that is AliExpress, where this cost-effective switch originally came from. Now, much like my previous 10 gig network switch video, this one has been sponsored by AliExpress's Cashback Challenge. Now, for those that aren't aware, if you go into the description of this video, you can get a link to the AliExpress app. And then from there, you can sign up for the Cashback Challenge and get 2% cashback in your wallet for everything you buy. And this can go up to 10% total cashback or up to £400. And remember, the Cashback Challenge is running from April 15th till April 30th. So join my team and get up to £400 back in your wallet there. Again, just go into the AliExpress app and search for the word compares. And once you find my team, go ahead, join it and start getting that cash back. Thanks again to AliExpress for sponsoring today's video. Now, I don't know if you've looked around at a lot of the network peripherals that have rolled out in the last year or so, but you may have noticed 10 GBE is all over the gaff. Getting yourself a 10 gig Ethernet switch has suddenly become a great deal easier, and also thanks to NVMe's becoming more affordable in NAS systems and more efficient SoC processors arriving, the result is with a lot of those mobile CPUs and the lane distribution, true M.2 NVMe NAS systems with 10G on board have started to become more affordable. The same goes with not only PCIe cards that add 10 GBE and combo cards that provide both services, but on top of that, we're seeing USB to 5 gig adapters become more affordable and USB-C to 10 gig adapters getting more efficient, more affordable, and more accessible on client hardware. Therefore, upgrading towards an affordable 10G switch is not only more attainable these days, but thanks to switches like this, a great deal more flexible. Likewise, thanks to adapters like this one, which can pick up for as little as 30 or 40 nicker, you can go ahead and add 10 GBE copper to existing SFP ports if you choose. So having that flexibility doesn't lock you in, by the way, to not be able to use standard copper on these. You can use adapters to increase these, but just keep in mind that if you try to use 2 adapters at once, heat generation may be a concern. But more on this switch, you've got the 6 ports there and an internal 120 gigabits per second switching capacity there. Now, I've added to system testing a few different setups. I had 2 copper and 2 SFP. I had 4 copper, all 10G running simultaneously. I even tested what the power consumption would be like in idle with nothing in it. More on that later on. On the side here, we have got our active cooling fan. And again, it's a very small one there, but we are going to have to talk about noise later on. The other side, we've got some ventilation, and that's really it. We've got the hooks for wall mounting the switch there, and the system arrives with software pre-installed for you to manage your network, and we'll talk about that later on as well, because that and the noise are definitely going to be concerns that you're going to have to keep in mind there long term. In terms of power consumption, I set the device up, initialized it, but I had no connections afterwards, so I removed all the connections, constituted a cold boot, and it achieved 7.5 watts idle, which is not the lowest, but keep in mind it is a 10G switch, so it's got a lot more hardware under the bonnet and that active cooling fan as well. Now, when I had the systems out with 4 active copper-based 10G connections with write and read happening across the board, with all of them running. So again, you're looking at 40 gigabits transmission. It achieved 19.8 watts consistently over time there. So 19.8 watts, obviously that power consumption is representative of that switch gunning it across 4 ports. I wasn't able to do a setup with all 6 in there, and unfortunately I didn't have I didn't have 6 10G clients to use. But even on those 4, that's still quite a decent jump in power consumption. So despite affordability in a kind of scale, keep in mind this is still going to be immeasurably higher than the power consumption of your average 1 gig or even 2 gig switch there. Now, heat generation is something we need to talk about because we've got that active cooling there on the side, and consequently we are going to be pondering just how much work that's going to be doing and how necessary it is. Anyone that's ever used even a semi-business class 10G switch will tell you that they can get noisy. Most switches that arrive with copper-based 10GBE on board at this level at 10 gig generally have active cooling systems. A lot of the time the SFP ones, even the unmanaged SFP ones, don't have active cooling, and the noise therefore isn't an issue. But in this case, and we'll get onto noise in a bit, that fan inside there didn't really have any kind of control. I wasn't able to adjust it up or down. Now, why is that important there? Well, nice and simple, because if you're in close proximity to this, it's going to get real irritating. I wasn't able to adapt it. I'm sure if I went in, I could probably find like a tiny little knock to a alternate fan that would have brought it down a few decibels. But regardless of whether it was in active use or it was in idle, the audio level is exactly the same. It's around 38 to 41 dBA, which again is slightly higher than I think a lot of you are going to want humming around by your ear. Listen for yourself. And I mentioned heat generation there. I will say that I did 2 different heat tests on this. I had it running for 1 day with 2 copper connections and 2 SFP connections there, and it achieved heat around 34 to 36 degrees there when it was in operation. Now, afterwards, I left it on and off use using just the copper connections for a week. In the background, I'm doing other things here on the channel, and during that 1 week of testing, that temperature still sat at around 31 to 33 degrees. Again, you can see the temperature sensor there on screen. I will say some of the highlighted deep reds there in the background of a plug point and an adapter that I was utilizing did kind of skew the results a little bit as far as the reading, but take my word, it was about 31 to 33, as you can see from the color spectrum there. So I was kind of impressed with the temperature when I've used some 10G switches that can get insanely hot, and obviously there's a reason this has active cooling. Now that active cooling feeds into 2 large heat sinks that cover the internal controllers there. Now I'm going to be coming back to this switch later this year when we're going to be comparing it against a certain Unify model. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the controller set. You can see some of that information in the software section soon. But the build quality of this is kind of what you'd expect for something you're going to pay 130 to 140 for. There are a lot of budget switches in the market. Again, very few of them dedicated copper and SFP 10G across the board. But I will say for what you're getting, the build quality is fine. You know, this external casing is very, very thin. It's not one of those switches, again, like some of the Unify offerings out there or the MikroTik, where the entire external casing is one large heatsink. This has an element of heat dissipation, but it's hardly hard-baked into that design philosophy. And now onto that software, because a lot of you, when you saw the price tag of, again, 130, 140, and it was pure 10G across 2 different mediums, you're probably thinking, how is that managed? That's insane. Well, I'll say right now, the software, although it does everything you want it to do, you know, individual port selection there, quality of service, priority of service, jumbo frame adaptation there, link aggregation, you know, loop detection, that sort of thing. It has all of the MAC address filtering. It has a bunch of port priority. Oh, sorry, I already touched on that. It has all of the settings, but the way it is displayed is not great. It has to be said, this is not a switch for the beginner. It is not a switch where the software is going to have much sizzle, much pizzazzle, much ease of use and hints and hand holding. It is complicated, it is not done with much polish, and I wouldn't really recommend this switch if you don't know what you're doing, because although you can use it out of the gate, and that's good, you know, at that price tag, it's definitely targeting more value-focused buyers. But if you're going to start tinkering around with the settings, there is so much you can get wrong on software like this. So keep in mind that although this is a managed switch and it does have the configuration you're going to need, it even had a few firmware updates as well. Keep in mind, this is quite a generic software platform and it will become intimidating very, very quickly. And as mentioned earlier on, you're not able to control things like the fan speed, user account creation is quite limited. There isn't two-factor authentication, that sort of stuff. Keep in mind, this is quite sparse looking software that has the feature set, but the controls and the management are definitely a steep learning curve. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, this is a switch I'm going to be returning to very soon with a premium grade switch comparison coming up, because I think it's important to understand what you can and cannot get for your money these days in 10G. And now we're starting to see the affordability of 25 gig and even 100 gig switches arriving on the scene. It means affordable 10GBE is really, you know, quite attainable now. And this is a great example of that. But just know what you're getting for your money. This is a budget switch for a reason. And if you are on a budget, good for you, this might be the one for you, but know that that budget happens because of certain compromises in terms of design and software philosophy. Keep that in mind. But apart from that, I'm going to continue using this in my setup. I'm going to add it to my existing arrangement of VLANs, and I think for what you are paying, there aren't many better options in the market at this price tag. There's going to be a link in the description to get hold of one of these for yourself if you are interested, alongside a few links to other switching guides that we have done. This featured, by the way, in a video we did about a month ago where we were talking about the best value 10 gig pure switches that you can get in the market right now, and it was there for a reason, sitting up there with the best. So I recommend you check that video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks again to AliExpress for sponsoring today's video. If you're interested in learning more, again, more links in the description to other videos and articles that we have made. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.